So in the last lesson, we finally styled our collection item component to have our hover add to cart button. In this section, let's actually wire up the appropriate Redux actions and Redux code so that this add to cart button actually starts saving these items into our cart reducer. So the first thing we need to do in order to do this is we have to add the actual property we're trying to set inside of our reducer. So inside of our application, if we go to our cart reducer, here we want to add a new property called cart items. And very similar to when we handle local state inside of a stateful component, such as a class component, we can set it in a very similar way with an empty array as the default value. Now what we need to do is we need to actually start adding items into this array or clearing them out depending on the feature. And in this case, what we want to do is we want to add items to this cart items array. So what we're going to have to do is we are going to have to add both the new actions and the new action types so that our reducers are aware of what add item action we're trying to make. So what we'll do is we will go to our cart types here, and inside we are going to make a new add item action, and we are going to use this first inside of a reducer. So what we need to think about is how we're going to do this. Now, I know that I mentioned in our final application that when we add items, it will increase a quantity instead of displaying them in a multiplicative way. But let's just start with that because we want to work from small features into their complexity first. So all we're going to do is we are just going to add the item into the array whenever the user clicks it. If there's duplicates, that's fine. They'll just show up in the array as duplicates, and we'll handle grouping them later. So what we're going to do is we are going to add a new case right underneath our first case with toggle cart hidden called cart action types using our new add item. And what we'll say is we want to return an object with all of the state, right? As it is, we'll spread it through. But now we want our cart items array to be our old cart items, and then with the newest action that got fired, right? That is triggering our add item. We want to deposit whatever the item is in the payload of that action into this array. So we'll first spread in the existing cart items that are already on our state. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to add the action payload to the end of this array. So if you're unfamiliar with this, all we're doing is we're spreading in all of our array values, and then any additional values we add at the end will automatically appear in the very end of this array, following all of our spread values from our existing array. So if this seems kind of confusing, it's okay. Don't worry, once we write the action, it will totally make sense. So just look at this right now. What we're doing is we're getting the item payload, right? We're assuming that the item coming in will be what will be the payload value on our action. What we need to do now is we actually need to write the action. So let's actually do that. Inside of cart actions, what we want to do is we want to make a new action called add item to cart. Actually, let's just call it add item. What it will be is a function that gets the item that we want to add to that array that we just made. And what we'll return is this new action type object where the type is our cart action types.add item, which will tell our reducer, hey, I'm trying to add this item. And the payload will be equal to the item. So as you remember, actions can have a type value and a payload value. The payload value can be anything we want it to be. And in our case, we want it to be the item we're trying to add into our cart items array. So now that we have this payload, right, inside of our action definition, let's actually bring this into our component so that we can actually use it. So what we need to do is we actually need to go back to our collection item, and now we want to import in all of the Redux bindings that give us access the same way that we saw when we did our toggle button. So we need to import in connect from React Redux. And then we need to import in that new add item action that we made. So let's just bring that in. Add item from Redux cart action. So with our new add item, we know that we need to create our map dispatch to props because we need to dispatch this new add item. And I'll show you what we're going to do with this one because now we need to take in this new item object as well. So map dispatch to props will be this function that gets a dispatch. And what we'll say is that whenever there's add item, it will get an item in as the property, right, of this function that will represent the add item prop that gets passed in. And then we will dispatch our add item action creator passing the item in. So all we're doing here is we are simply creating this new function that's a prop called add item that will go into our collection item as the add item function that we need to leverage. And then what we do is whenever we actually dispatch or call this function will receive the item as the property, pass it into our add item action creator, which gives us back that object where the type is equal to add item and the payload is equal to the item that got passed in. And then we will dispatch that new object into our store and it'll go through our Redux flow. So here we just need to make sure, right, because we're not actually taking any map state to props, that we pass null as the first value, and then we pass our map dispatch to props as the second value. So now we'll have access to this add item dispatch into our props, which we want to make sure that we destructure off. But now is the interesting part, because we actually need access to the item that this collection item represents now in order for us to actually dispatch it into our new add item function that we wrote. So we need to actually tweak our code a little bit. The first thing that we need to do is we need to see where we're using our collection item, which is our collection preview. Normally what we do is we just spread in all of the props, as you remember, right, from the item itself, other than the ID, because we use it as the key, that is the ID value. And then we spread everything else in as a prop, which we then destructure off of our props object and use inside of our collection item. Instead, what we want to do is we just want to pass the whole item in as item. So instead of doing it like this, we are going to say that what we want is the whole item. And then for the key, we're still going to call item.id, except now we're going to pass item as the item. So as you see, all we did was just simply pass the whole item in. Key is still item.id, still using the ID. But now in our collection item, we have access to our item object. Now we still need to use these values. So let's cut these out. And what we'll do is we will do a explicit return of our function. So before, when we had these round brackets, we're just going to use our squiggly brackets, which implies that we are rendering multiple JavaScript out of this function. We will make sure to return our component from this. But what we'll do inside of our new squiggly brackets is we will say const destructure these properties that we were destructuring before from the props, except I want you to destructure them off the item. Now, the reason we're doing this is because we want these values still, because we use them inside of our component definition, but we need access to the item itself. So this way we actually have access to the item now. So we see that we're not using the ID, so let's just remove that from here. And then on our custom button, we'll say onClick is this function that will fire calling our add item, passing the item in. I know we wrote a lot of code just now just to set up our Redux, but this is actually a very simple flow once you get used to all of the moving parts. So let's actually first see it before we review this. Now that we've written this, let's go to our application. And now we'll see that whenever we click our add item to cart, we're firing our new add item action. The payload is that item that we have. And we'll see inside of our actual cart reducer that our cart is updating. And now we're displaying these items. And while they might not be grouped together, even though they're the same item, we can see that our Redux action is working. And it's firing whenever we click. Every time we click, we're getting our add item action to dispatch. And our cart is getting updated in its cart items with the newest thing that was being added appended to the end of our cart items array. So if we just go over this one more time, what we did was we had to make sure that we added the new value, which was our cart items that we were trying to track, into our initial state of our reducer. Then we had to make a new action that was going to represent what we were trying to do to modify that new property, which is our cart items array. Next, we define the actual action itself, which is our add item, which is a function that gets the item and generates this new action with the action type of add item that we just made, passing the item in as the payload, which our reducer then has to listen for with the new case for that new action type that we just made, so that whenever the action comes in, we make sure that what we're doing is we're returning the new state of our overall cart reducer. So it has whatever existing hidden value is there, except the cart items array is a new array. We have to make sure it's a new array where we spread in the existing cart items, except we append the new item that we get as a payload in at the end of this array. Finally, we have to make sure that we update our actual collection item so that it pulls into its props using the new map dispatch to props, where we make sure that when we define the actual add item prop itself, it's a function that gets whatever we want to pass in as the payload, in as the property. We then return the dispatch action on us creating our actual action using our add item action creator that we defined, as you remember, right here. So as we remember, this returns the object, which represents our new add item action type, as well as the payload, which it then finally dispatches. I know this is a lot of Redux juggling. It's like we're jumping back and forth between all these Redux files, right, just to do something like this. And this is kind of the overhead that comes with Redux. But at the same time, we've now defined this function that we can use anywhere on any component that allows us to add these items into the same array that we're using in different places in our application as well. So it's kind of the right trade-off. It increases in this complexity, but it gives us these beautiful reusable functions and reusable state that we can now leverage across the application. So now that we have our add item action that adds to this array, let's actually start grouping them so that we don't get these duplicates inside of this array. So I'll see you in the next lesson.